minutes.
I thank the Chairman, and thank you and Mr. Meadows for putting this hearing together. Mr. Kurlikowski, a couple months ago we had an individual from DHS here, and we asked her a number of questions, and she wasn't able to give us any answers. Some of them didn't deal directly, and I'm going to ask you some of the same questions. They didn't deal directly with the visa waiver program, but information I think the American public is interested in knowing. So I'm going to ask you some of the same ones to see if you have the answers. Do you know how many Americans have traveled to Syria in the past 2 years?
I do not.
And who would have that information? And
within DHS headquarters, there is a visa waiver office, and they're also they would work with the Department of State on that information. We have a fairly narrow mission.
I'm talking about just Americans who've traveled to Syria, people who've left our country to travel. Do we know that number?
Well, if you're also
not necessarily visa waiver program folks, but just
I think
anyone.
you get the numbers from the FBI and the National Counterterrorism Center. I know last year, so it was over 100. I don't know what the numbers are today.
Okay, and so over 100. And of those do we know how many of those 100 who've traveled there who've then come back?
If you're talking about those that may do harm and we're concerned about and may come back, I think whether it's the DNI or others, I think we would be much more comfortable in a closed setting giving you that information. But
I'm not asking whether they're going to do harm or not. I'm just asking, do we know Americans who've traveled to Syria, Iraq, Syria, Iraq, and then have come back? Do we know that number?
We do know that number.
Okay. But you don't think we should give that in a non-classified?
Because I would tell you that I think that there is a significant heightened risk unless there is particular information that they went over as a medical worker, et cetera.
Understand.
So we'd be more comfortable telling you that in a closed setting.
So let's go to, do we know how many Syrian refugees are in the country today? Again, not the visa waiver program, I'm talking about Syrian refugees. And Ms. Johnson or whoever, either one.
And I think that USCIS, the director, Leon Rodriguez, that is something that would be within his portfolio, not Customs and Border Protection.
Okay. All right, let's go to visa waiver program. How many visa waiver program overstays are there currently in the United States?
The number of overstays was estimated in the last report, and as Chairman Meadows mentioned,
this is the most recent report that you guys just put together.
Exactly.
Okay. What was that number again?
Over 500,000 overstays.
Over 500,000. And what's the average length of time they've overstayed?
I don't have that.
Is it in the report?
I believe it is.
Okay. And of those 500,000 overstays, do we know how many of those may have been to Syria or Iraq in the past couple of years? I mean, do you know their travel history? So they're coming from largely, I mean, most likely a European country who are part of the visa waiver program. Do we know of those 500,000 who are here, who've overstayed the time they were supposed to be here, do we know how many of those may have traveled to Syria or Iraq?
If we have the information from an air manifest or a sea manifest as to whether or not they had traveled to another country, we would have that information, and I'd be happy to try and provide more detail. I wouldn't have that right in front of me.
But you do think you could get me that information?
I could get you much more specifics to what you're asking than what I can tell you right now.
Well, I think that's an important question. Right. I mean, because if you got 500,000 people who are overstaying the time that they're supposed to be here, we want to know where they came from. We want to know where they've traveled. I mean, the whole idea is that this visa waiver program could be exploited by terrorists. Be interesting to know if some of the people who are currently here who have overstayed have already violated what the agreement is, what the law is, if they've been to places in the Middle East prior to coming to the United States.
And we also know that in order for a country to remain in the visa waiver program, there has to be a percentage, an overstay percentage, I believe is below 3%.
Wait, say that again?
So all these countries that are in the visa waiver program do a whole host of things that they share information,
right?
Whether it's lost or stolen passports, on and on. They also have to abide by a reduced amount of people that would be in an overstay capacity. That would be one of the criteria.
Okay, so, that sort of raises the question then of these 500,000 people who are here who aren't supposed to be here, what kind of ramifications or consequences do the countries that they came from, what kind of consequences have happened?
Well, I would tell you that
It's one thing to say there are going to be consequences. We want to know for the 500,000 who are here who aren't supposed to be here, have there been any consequences?
well, I would tell you that the 500,000 people includes the people that got on the plane and left the day after their overstay. And I think, as Chairman Meadows mentioned, that there's a lot of gaps in that data. I mean, that's why I think it took so many years for people to try and gather it and put it together. That's why I was very pleased that Secretary Johnson, working with us and other parts of the DHS headquarters, were able to put together a report. And as I think all of us have clearly mentioned, there are gaps in the report. The data gathering needs to be better, and the information needs to be supplied not just to the members of Congress, but also to the American public. None of us disagree with that.
Yep. I'm over time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.